Welcome to the Star Podcast.
Whoa. Star Podcast.
Welcome to the Star Podcast, hosted by Nat. Each week, we share tips and stories from safety, trucking, and recruitment, and everything in between. Listen now.
Welcome back to another episode. Today's episode is a very sensitive subject. I have the honor of sitting down with Scott Thomas, and his son Evan was one of the victims in the Humboldt bus crash in 2018. And I don't know how Scott does it. He speaks so well. He speaks so great about Evan, about the accident. I don't even know where he finds his strength, but I commend him for that. And he's such a great speaker, a lovely person to get to sit down and speak with. And this is a very emotional episode, but it's so important because Scott touches on the importance of road safety, driver safety, and I think he just teaches us about having compassion, and what an amazing person. So I just want to thank Scott for joining us, sharing some memories about Evan, and I hope you listen now.
I just wanted to welcome you onto the podcast. You were actually, referred to me by my boss, Kevin, who was at a event, I believe in Burlington, and heard you speak, and him and Brian were blown away at what an excellent speaker you were with such a big topic. So I was just hoping to get started. You could just introduce yourself and just share a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Thanks, Leslie. It's not a position I ever wanted to be in, to be up in front of people talking about, personal things like that. I found myself in this situation and definitely now, kind of taking the opportunity to make things a little bit safer, if you will. So my name's Scott Thomas. I'm from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And my son, Evan Thomas, was one of the Broncos who died in the bus crash on April 6, 2018. And ever since then, I've kind of made myself as aware as I can be about the events that led up to that day, what kind of situation existed for that accident to happen, and then certainly after the fact now, doing everything I can to become more acquainted with the trucking industry, the issues that it's battling, and again, just to kind of be involved and tell my son's story, keep his legacy alive for sure, and hopefully in his name, kind of make the world a safer place, because my daughter's still out there driving on those roads, and there's a lot of people that use our public roadways, and if there's anything that I can do to try and make it a little bit safer, I'm going to do it. So that's kind of my story, if you will, in regards a little bit, anyways, on the surface, and I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more as we go through some of these questions. But yeah, I'm a chiropractor here in the city of Saskatoon. My daughter now, Jordan, is 24 years old. She's in chiropractic college as well in Toronto right now. So she's getting all grown up. And yeah, just been involved in hockey. A lot of my stuff will come back to reference hockey at some point. I played hockey, junior hockey. I played college hockey. And then, of course, my son, Evan, both my kids played hockey. But, Evan in particular, who's, that's who we're kind of talking about here. I followed him, coached him all the way up until the point where I couldn't coach him anymore, and he went off on his own and tried to strike his own path, if you will. So very involved in hockey still. I do some coaching, I do some scouting, and yeah, just try and speak to whoever I can about these types of issues.
What kind of led you down that path of choosing, because there was so many different paths I guess you could have went after the accident, but you chose to, speak, and now you're sharing your experience, which I think is amazing. And it's incredible that you can go and speak about Evan and speak about what happened. What kind of led you down that path? Was it a way to connect, kind of stay in touch with Evan, or what was that choice?
Yeah, in the immediate aftermath of the accident, for whatever reason, I became a pretty public face, if you will. The media, they're pretty smart, and they can figure out who's willing to talk to them pretty quickly. And for whatever reason, I talked to them fairly consistently and fairly openly. And that kind of gained some momentum, if you will. And ever since then, I've just try to stay involved with the industry out here. And I've been lobbying, the government a few times, talking to, people in the government, some people in the industry, just to try and, continue moving this issue forward. And it's only aside from the media that I've done, the few interviews that I've done, I've really only spoken to groups, if you will, 2 or 3 times. It started with the PTAC group in October in Calgary, and then Kim Richardson had me out there in Burlington there in April to speak to his group. And it's not something that I don't have a speech, if you will. I prefer just to talk about things in this environment, and usually it starts with talking about my son, and then of course the accident and the aftermath and what we can do to hopefully make this place a little bit safer. So it's kind of something I just fell into, if you will. Earl Dreger from PTAC, we kind of knew each other personally, and he came to me, I guess, a year ago at this time and said, hey, PTAC's having this conference in October and we'd love to have you speak. And that was really, I guess, the first one that I did, and things are kind of just transpiring from there, if you will.
For sure. So with all your experience researching and being involved in the industry, like what are your kind of insights, or what's something that workplaces and employees can do to be safer and to prevent tragedies like this?
After the accident happened, I tried to find out everything I could about the driver, Jaskrat Sidhu, and just basically what happened. Like how on earth could these 2 vehicles come together like that? It became pretty apparent to me that he was, I'll say, poorly trained, very minimally trained, and put in a position to fail by a bad employer. Adesh DL Trucking, put a inexperienced driver into a vehicle. That was his first solo trip outside the city of Calgary. He drove 7.5 hours to a remote part of northeastern Saskatchewan with a truck that he'd never driven before. And I just, the more I looked into it, I felt bad for the guy. I felt bad for Jaskrat Sidhu, and I know he bears all the responsibility for this because he did blow through that stop sign. But he was put in a position to fail, and I almost think he was taken advantage of by his employers. And really, he was in a no-win situation. And I think it became very clear what really drove that home is, 5 days after the accident, Adesh Dial was running advertisements under a new name, under a different number company for new drivers within 5 days, and his company was fined $5,000. And I think, that company bears a lot of responsibility for what happened because they put a very minimally trained driver into a bad situation. So I think there's a lot of areas of responsibility. First and foremost, the education of drivers. But secondly, I think employers even bear more of a responsibility to make sure that their employers are the best that they can be. I know in Saskatchewan, our MELT program is the very minimum. Like, it is the very minimum. So if employers are getting these guys out of the MELT program thinking, okay, here's your ticket, way you go drive into the mountains in BC, like, they're not trained for that. They're not even close to trained for that. So I think the employers have to realize what they're getting and their responsibility to bring these guys up to speed, if you will. And then, of course, the other part of that is the regulation by the government and the industry, I think, of both the training, the standards of the education that these guys are coming out with, and then also, too, the ongoing education that the companies are putting through, and making sure that all these companies are following the rules. And again, Leslie, I realize that 90%, 95% of the companies that are out there are good. They're trying to do things the best they can. But, unfortunately, the work that I'm doing, looking into things, you got these chameleon carriers that basically they're like an SDO was. He's a chameleon carrier. They're the ones that I think put a real bad stain on this. And they're the ones that I want to, shine a bit of a spotlight on. And, the good companies, I just want them to realize that keep doing what they're doing, because there's companies out there that aren't, and hopefully they can kind of drag everybody along in a good direction here.
You felt bad for the driver, and I just think that's so incredibly compassionate of you when you could have chose to be very angry. And I mean, and there's nothing wrong with someone being angry. It's such a awful situation, but I just want to mention that you've probably been told that before, that's pretty remarkable that you can choose to feel sorry for him. And I know I was listening to some of your speaking and interviews and different things where you had met the driver, like that's pretty amazing of you. So
Yeah, Leslie, the one thing that I've learned about grief is there's no right path for everybody, and that's one of the things about our tragedy, if you will. There's 29 families going through it. 16 directly lost somebody, and there's no right way to grieve. There's no blueprint for it, and what works for me doesn't need to work for other people. It just doesn't. There's 16 families that are grieving, all react differently, and that's okay. We all have beliefs and convictions that we hold dear, and that's good as long as you firmly believe that. That's okay. But yeah, for me and for our family, it just became clear to us really quickly that first of all, we think that Evan was a very empathetic man, and we've always tried to conduct ourselves in a way our kids would be we'd be proud of, and we can model good behaviors for them. And it became clear to me very fast that it wasn't Jaskrat Sidhu's intention at all that day to cause damage. It certainly wasn't his intention to kill 16 people. He didn't intend, to cause that accident. So, the more I got into the circumstances around it, I'm like, this just doesn't all add up. So very quickly I said, yeah, of course I want to sit down and meet him. I want to ask him what the hell happened, like what went wrong. And we're at the victim sentencing hearing in Melfort, and I said publicly in a few interviews leading up to that yes, I would like to meet him. And then in Melfort, one of his relatives came up and tapped me on the knee and said, if you would like to meet Jaskrat, he would like to meet with you. And so we went into a back room, and me and his family, and as I've said before, he fell on his knees and was weeping like a baby. And I picked him up and we hugged, and he is a broken man. He was, and he is. And, I sincerely believe that. And it was, forgiveness for us was just, I don't want to say the easiest path, but in a way it was. Because to hang on to anger and hatred, that takes a lot of work and a lot of energy. And it would have been a lot different if his intention was different, but it just wasn't. And could he have done things differently? Absolutely. Should he have done things differently? Yes. But he made a horrible, horrible mistake.
I know you can't speak on his behalf or anything, but did he feel that he was not trained properly? Did he feel comfortable with driving and everything?
We didn't talk specifics in our meeting. The only thing that he said that I've seen publicly is, when he made a statement in court, he said it was his inexperience that caused this accident. He said, I was inexperienced, and that's kind of what he said in court. So I think he knew he was, and this is just my opinion about what happened that day. He was in Saskatoon the night before. He got lost on his way going out there a couple times, was completely lost, showed up at the site to load the peat moss late, couldn't back up the vehicle on his own. The guys in the yard had to back the vehicle up, tarped him up, and he left in a panic. He was running behind. And again, this is just my opinion, but I'm sure his owner was in his ear saying, you're behind, you're lost, got to get going. Yeah, I think he panicked. I think he was very ill prepared to be operating that rig in that part of the country. He just was. He shouldn't have been there.
I see a lot of in your background for anyone who is seeing the video, but is that all of Evan's, like his trophies and his sports? Yes.
Yeah, we were lucky. After the accident, the Broncos renovated their dressing room. So this was his locker that came out of the dressing room that he had used that year. And then, there's just some of his jerseys and the tie that Evan was standing when the accident happened. He was putting his tie on, and the tie that's hanging there was the one that he was putting on. And so just a bunch of little memorabilia about him. Like to keep him present for sure. So yeah, that's his locker that was in the Broncos dressing room.
Oh, that's so special. And you mentioned he was obviously very into hockey, and you also said he was also really into baseball and talented with baseball.
Yeah, I think he liked baseball more.
Oh.
There's an expectation, if you will, in Saskatchewan and maybe even in Canada that they should play hockey. So he did,
Yes.
and he was a very good hockey player. But I think he liked baseball more. He went to 2 national championships when he was in 15U. He won best defensive player of the tournament when he was 15 in North York there. And yeah, he was a very good baseball player. He was just a good athlete all around, and the kind of kid that could just figure something out. Like he loved playing chess. He started playing chess when he was young, and it didn't take him long to start beating me. And yeah, he was a kid who came by things naturally. And when he committed to doing something, he made sure that he was good at it. But yeah, he was a good ball player too.
And you shared that he was a very like empathetic person. Is there anything else that you wanted to share about Evan, like just about his character and about any stories or anything?
Yeah, and unfortunately, you don't, when your kids are teenagers, you don't know everything about them. But so many times after the accident, we had his friends come knock on our door, and they would tell us little things that he did. One classic story, a young lady and her dad came and knocked on our door, and she's crying, and she basically said that Evan saved her life. She was getting bullied at the high school, and Evan kind of saw it happening, and he sat down with her and kind of talked her through it, and they kind of became friends. And then after the accident, this young lady started actually speaking to vulnerable groups, and Evan was part of her.
Oh,
Just
wow.
little things like that I had no idea. And her dad was sitting there with her, and he corroborated everything. And she's like, "Yeah, this is what happened." And so, little things like that I would have never known.
Yeah. Oh,
You know?
he sounds like he's a very kind person.
He was very kind. Yeah, he had an old soul. Like right from me as little, and he's just got such an old soul. He was so compassionate and so wise. He was wise. Like he didn't say much until he said something, and then when he said something, he was very focused and he was an old soul.
Is there anything that like is not the most important, but what do you want to try to share with people, like anyone who's listening? What's the one thing that you want people to take away?
Yeah, I kind of alluded to it before, and in some sense, Leslie, I like to say I'm one of the trucking industry's biggest critics, but I'm also one of their biggest cheerleaders, because I know what their job entails, and I know how important they are, and we need our roads to be safe. Like I said, my daughter is still out there driving on those roads. One of the things I've come to realize is, our roadways are public, but they're also one of the biggest commercial spaces in the country. Like the amount of commerce, it's really, our roadways are a workplace. They're a workplace. And
Absolutely.
I think the employers need to realize that the people that they're putting into public space like that need to be able to trust that they're putting the best people out there in a situation to succeed. And as I said before, most are, but some aren't. And I just want those employers out there to realize that the people they're getting need work. Most of them are coming with the absolute bare minimum. And I know in Saskatchewan, you can get your melt program in a small town called Eyebrow, Saskatchewan, that doesn't even have a stoplight. And you can do all your training in small town Saskatchewan and get your minimum ticket and be given the keys to go driving down the 401 in Toronto. Go drive through the mountains in BC. Well, that's not a good situation. I think, and most of the people that I seem to find myself talking to are employers. And I said, most of them that are in the room are good, but I just want them to realize that they have a responsibility here to put their people in a good situation, because all our kids are using those public roads. I would definitely like the opportunity to get in front of more regulators and oversight people, and if that's government, if you will, because I think ultimately they're dropping the ball here. I said one of the things that I can't believe, 16 people died there. And if this was a train or a plane, the National Transportation Safety Bureau would have been there like that. But because it was a semi-driver and a bus, there wasn't even a coroner's inquest. There was a coroner's investigation. Well, how can the government allow that kind of situation to happen without even investigating it more? Like if there was a national standard here for this industry, I think it would hold educators to a higher standard. It would hold employers to a higher standard. It would hold everybody to a higher standard, but there's no minimum national requirements, if you will, and no national oversight. And And you can drive from BC to Halifax, and somehow there's no national regulation over that, where airlines are and railways are. And so why is this industry not held to that standard? So, just little things like that. And I think maybe people in the industry need to start asking that question too, because it can only create a better situation for them.
Right.
But I think my main message, Leslie, is just, don't take your eyes off the prize here, and keep doing the best things you can, and the best practices you can, because when all three of those things go wrong, this is what happens. This is what happens.
Yeah, it's not just an accident, it's people's lives, and it's the families, and absolutely.
There's accidents you don't hear about. They happen all the time. This one was national news, and on a scale that never been seen before, and hopefully we never see again. But that's one of the reasons why I keep talking, is because I don't want to see something like this happen again. I mean, everybody that loses a life, it's tragic. This one, the scale was just bigger. And I said how you can bring those two vehicles together at that exact situation at that moment in time, for that to happen like that, is just unfathomable how it happened. But it did. And anything we can do to make sure that doesn't happen again, I'm willing to talk about it.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate that you are, going to speaking events, and you are trying to raise more awareness of this, because I think we need to talk about it and what we can do to help prevent it and to make things safer. Because I mean, people driving trucks or driving a regular vehicle, like, it can cause harm to yourself and to other people. So absolutely, we need to try to keep everyone safe so that everyone gets home at the end of the day. Absolutely.
Yeah, in the immediate aftermath of the accident, the Saskatchewan government popped up, okay, good, we're doing something. This has got to be good, right? Well, okay, you did something. But now I really don't think, Leslie, that we're in a much better situation than we were 8 years ago. I really don't. I know it's Saskatchewan. I question the level of education some of these drivers are getting. I think I saw a stat in Saskatchewan that at the time of the accident, there was something like 11 accredited driving schools, and now there's something like 29 driving schools, and they haven't hired any more oversight people. Like, it's just exploded, and there's no oversight, or very little oversight from what I can see, over these educators in Saskatchewan. And I think they're turning out some bad product. And as I said, then they let these guys out there with their minimum ticket, and employers are turning them loose. I don't think we're any safer. I really don't. And that's why I'm trying to keep talking. I hope to let everybody know that I don't feel safer, and I don't think a lot of people do.
I think that's really important. So thank you for everything you're doing, and I appreciate you sharing about Evan and about your life and everything. So I truly appreciate you taking the time to speak with us, and I think what you're doing is making a difference, and it's a great way that you're honoring your son. So
thank you, Leslie. I certainly hope that it is, and I do think it's making a difference, because every time I do speak to someone else comes and asks me to talk some more. So as I said, I'll take any opportunity I can to talk about Evan, keep his legacy alive, any opportunity at all. So I appreciate that.
For anyone listening that maybe wants to keep up to date with what you're doing, do you have a website, or do you have anywhere that, like, social media or anything that people can connect with you?
Not specifically. We do have Evan Thomas. We have a memorial trust, so the Evan Thomas Memorial Trust.ca. So we have a trust page for him, and on that website, we list the activities that we do, any donors that we have. We're very fortunate. We have, a hockey tournament for 13-year-old kids that we do here in Saskatoon, and a baseball tournament for 15-year-olds that we do, that are both in his name, and any money that we raise from that goes into his trust, and we give it away to different charitable causes around the city. We give Stars Air Ambulance money every year, because Stars was very important that day. They saved some of the boys' lives, but unfortunately for Evan, he died at the scene, so he wasn't able to be helped by Stars. But so off of that website, there's a list of who we donate to, and everything we try and do in Evan's name. And anything, I think there is a contact me link off of that web page. It might go to my dad, but somebody would get that information. If somebody want to get in contact with me, really, just Google Scott Thomas Saskatoon, or chiropractor, and there would be a link to my chiropractic clinic's website there, and then those messages definitely come to me.
Okay, so I'll put the link for Evan Thomas Memorial Trust.ca. I'll put that in the show notes, and then I'll Google you and try to find your information, and I'll include that just in case someone maybe wants to speak to you about speaking, or maybe just wants to connect. So perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, feel free to reach out. Like I said, I'll take any opportunity I can to talk about these kinds of things. So
amazing. Well, thank you very much again for taking the time to speak with us, and I appreciate you sharing your story.
thanks, Leslie. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.